Hi there, welcome to Pallet University. Today we are taking a look at how Pokemon might be as pets in your home, specifically one of probably the least favorite starter Pokemon, Meganium. Thank you to Prima Diva for the suggestion, and if you have a suggestion for a Pokemon that you would like to see talked about in the sort of realm of keeping as a pet instead of sort of a battle or travel companion, please let me know down below. And while you're down there, make sure to leave a thumbs up on the video if you do like it, and subscribe to keep up on more sciencey type Pokemon content. As with every video in this series, please go check out the YouTube channel Clint's Reptiles. It is sort of where I borrowed this sort of format from. Basically, he makes videos about non-traditional pets, you know, your non-cats and dogs and such. And, you know, he's a PhD biologist, he really knows what he's talking about, and he just explains everything in a way that makes it really simple to understand. So it would really mean a lot to me if you went and checked out Clint's channel. So with that, we are here to answer the question, is Meganium the best pet Pokemon for you? Meganium gets a score of 3.2 out of 5, and that comes down to the 5 categories, which are Handleability, Care, Hardiness, Availability, and Upfront Costs. For Handleability, the Meganium line gets a score of 4 out of 5. Chikorita seems very easily handleable. It seems very, you know, docile and non-confrontational, so it's not like it's going to hurt you, or at least try to hurt you. The leaf on its head might be somewhat sharp, but that seems like it would be easy enough to avoid. When it evolves, Bayleaf becomes slightly larger than like a medium-sized dog and weighs about as much as like a border collie, sort of in that range, so you could definitely pick it up comfortably. But its body's just sort of shaped oddly in that it probably wouldn't be comfortable for you nor your Bayleaf. So you're probably better off just leaving it on the ground like you would with most normal, you know, medium-sized dogs. Meganium gets much larger than Bayleaf when it evolves and is roughly me-sized. It's also significantly heavier than Bayleaf, and so I would say almost nobody would be able to just sort of casually pick up a Meganium. That's just not really something that you can do. So you'd probably interact with it in similar ways that you would to some of like the giant dogs, such as like a Mastiff or a Great Dane. You'd be really hard pressed to like get hurt by one of these Pokemon like by accident. In fact, pretty much all of them, you know, in their Pokedex entries say that their scent is actually really calming. So it might actually be really relaxing to have, you know, just a Chikorita sitting on your couch with you or a Meganium curled up on the floor. This whole line gets a 4 instead of a 5, mostly just because Meganium gets so large that it could potentially like hurt a child by accident, just because of how large it is. Next we have Care, and the Meganium line gets a score of 2 out of 5. I don't think it would be incredibly hard to care for, you know, a Pokemon in the Meganium line. However, it would be relatively complex. Being that these Pokemon essentially need the care of both a plant and an animal at the same time, it would need to be provided with a very specific and pretty complex environment, and also a pretty specific and complex diet. In order to do photosynthesis properly, you know, these Pokemon would need, you know, proper amounts of nutrients, such as, you know, nitrogen, phosphorus, and other non-traditional nutrients. You know, you can't really find great amounts of those in like dog food. Most plants sort of suck these up through their roots, but these Pokemon don't have roots, so you would need to provide these nutrients through their food, or potentially through their water, which is what I personally would do. I would recommend sort of infusing their water with some of these nutrients. You know, I'm positive that you can find like dissolvable nitrogen or dissolvable phosphorus to put in their water that they drink and provide them, you know, those nutrients that way through their water. And then also supplementing it with some kind of food that is relatively rich in those nutrients as well. But a really important thing with a lot of plants, especially some of the more hard to care for plants, is like the different ratios of different, you know, kinds of nutrients that they need. And what would those ratios be for a Meganium? I have no idea. I couldn't even begin to imagine what like Meganium's like physiology would be like, you know, all of its metabolic pathways. There's no animal that's even remotely close to what that physiology would be like of both a plant and an animal. So I have no idea. The best estimate that I could give would probably to follow something similar to what's called the Redfield ratio. That's mostly used by like phytoplankton out in the ocean, but it is broadly applicable to a lot of other types of plants. Photosynthetic organisms that sort of use the red field ratio basically need a ratio of 106 parts carbon to 16 parts nitrogen to 1 part phosphorus. And since Meganium can pretty much just get the carbon from the air, you would basically just need to provide a ratio of roughly 16 parts nitrogen to 1 part phosphorus. But exactly how much of each, nutrient to provide it with, I have no idea. There's really no way to know that, which is kind of what decreases the care score for Meganium, because like with some of the other Pokemon where you can just like keep it in a big tank, or like with Arcanine and Growlithe where you can just sort of keep them outside and give them presumably meat because that's what they would be eating in nature. I have no idea what a hybrid plant animal would need for nutrients realistically, so that's just, I can't really say. Lighting would also be super important for these Pokemon, mostly because you need like a grow light, the sort of purplish color, the red and blue colored lights that you might see over somebody's like office desk plant. You would need a significant area of that, or just white light would work too. And then you would also probably need ultraviolet lights as well, because it appears to be some form of reptile. So many reptiles, especially diurnal ones, ones that are awake during the day, need ultraviolet light to be able to absorb calcium into their bones correctly. Otherwise you get things like metabolic bone disease, which is something that's way too common in people who have pet reptiles, unfortunately. But it can be really, really debilitating and not what you want your Meganium to have for the rest of its life. It kind of seems like they'd be able to do fine at roughly room temperature, maybe slightly above, into like the mid-70s probably would be okay for them. But again, that's kind of hard to tell. For space, Meganium is just so large that I would imagine that it would need at least like a proper room in your house, if not more. Preferably if you lived in a place where the climate was suitable, you could probably just keep your Meganium outside and it would do perfectly fine. Next we have Hardiness, for which the Meganium line gets a score of 4 out of 5. One of the biggest problems with plants is them drying out and dying that way. Plants do have a lot of, adaptations that are used to conserve water, but in general, animals are better at it than plants tend to be. Obviously, there are exceptions, such as like, cacti are obviously exceptional at conserving water. But animals in general are just kind of naturally better at it, or have some adaptations that allow them to retain water slightly better than plants do. So because Meganium's kind of like a weird animal-plant hybrid, it would be better than like a pure plant at conserving water, but that would still be my largest worry with these Pokemon, is some kind of dehydration. If you don't provide enough water, or potentially too much water, or even the right amounts of nutrients that it would need, it could kind of just keel over and die, as a lot of species of plants and also reptiles are kind of prone to doing. For availability, the Meganium line gets a score of 4 out of 5. Because they're a starter Pokemon, they'd certainly be available from breeders, and seeing as I mentioned, Chikorita is not the most popular of starter Pokemon, I would imagine that there wouldn't be a ton of demand for them, so I would assume that because they have to be produced for, Pokemon professors and such, that there would be some around, but not enough to like suck up, not everybody, given the option between Chikorita, Totodile, and Cyndaquil, most people won't choose Chikorita, myself included. So there would be enough of them around that you could probably fairly comfortably find them if you wanted to go about buying it from a breeder. And it gets a 4 out of 5 because that's pretty much your only option. Because contrary to a lot of other starter Pokemon, there is only one region that you can catch Chikorita in the wild, and that's the Alola region using the Island Scan. And that's why they sort of lose a point, because if you wanted to not get one from a breeder, if you wanted to go out and catch one from the wild, you pretty much can't unless you happen to live in Alola. For our last category, we have Upfront Costs, for which the Meganium line gets a score of 2 out of 5. As sort of mentioned, the Pokemon itself wouldn't be all that expensive, but that's generally the case for a lot of reptiles anyway, is that a lot of the enclosure setups are generally more expensive than the actual animal. There are some definite exceptions for that, but generally for most of the relatively common reptiles, that's definitely true. Those grow lights and ultraviolet lights that I mentioned you would need for it can get relatively expensive, especially because I don't know about grow lights, but definitely UV lights you need to change out relatively often. And it's not like you could just have one sitting on a particular spot. You would need them sort of spread out. And so it wouldn't have to sit in one spot in order to get what it needs, but also spread out enough that it wouldn't, get like a sunburn or something from being under one spot for too long. On top of that, you'd probably need to buy sort of bulk samples or bulk like containers of dissolvable nitrogen and phosphorus, which you can probably do. I didn't actually check that. They're probably available, but it's probably not cheap. And lastly, giving up an entire room in your house and sort of outfitting it for a 220-pound movable plant probably wouldn't be cheap. So there's that to consider too. This score dramatically improves though if you are able to keep Meganium outside full time. So there's that. And that is why Meganium gets a score of 3.2 out of 5. This would probably be the easiest dinosaur-like Pokemon to keep as a pet, but if you want me to cover some of the other dinosaur-like Pokemon, you'll have to let me know that down in the comments. Make sure to follow us on Twitter as well at Pallet_U to keep up on all things Pokemon science, as well as if you feel like this content is worthy of supporting financially, we do have a Patreon, the link to which will be down in the description. A massive, massive shout out to our current Patreon supporters, Patty Murphy and Sam McCarty. As always, your support's greatly appreciated. And lastly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, there's a time and place for everything.